Hello, everybody. So we are getting into chapter 5 today, looking at 5.1, exploring what makes triangles congruent. All right, so that's kind of the whole premise of this entire section here. Congruent triangles, how do we know they're congruent, and what can we do with that? Okay, so first thing, go ahead and get the title, go ahead and get this first slide, and then I'll explain what's going on. All right, so this is just giving, obviously giving you an example of what congruent triangles are and what not congruent triangles are. So the big thing to take away from this is congruent triangles. They have the same size and shape as one another. Okay, that's what it needs to be considered congruent. It gets more technical than that, but that's kind of the basic, overview idea. Same size, same shape. Okay, and over here, not congruent is triangles that are different sizes and different shapes. All right, so that's a really kind of, I guess, simplified way of thinking about it, but it's a good starting point. Okay, so yeah, it's all about congruent triangles today, and let's see what happens when we have congruent triangles. Okay, so go ahead, take a minute, get this whole slide here. This is an important one. All right, so here is, what this slide's telling us. It's saying that these triangles are congruent to one another. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle FED. All right, the first thing I want to point out here is the order of the letters does matter when naming or triangles, when you're making what they call a congruency statement. That's what this is what would be considered. Okay, the order of these letters matters because A, B and C and F, E, and D are the vertex of these triangles. Okay, you can think of it as like the points of the triangles. All right, and when they tell us that two triangles are congruent, if they're saying, angle A is congruent to angle F, okay, that's what it's implying. If you guys look over here, we can see that angle A is congruent to angle F. All right, and then, going down the list, the same idea, we can see that angle B is congruent to angle E, okay, and then we can see that angle C is congruent to angle D. Okay, so that's why the ordering of these letters matters, because if this said like D, E, F, then this would imply that angle A was congruent to angle D. Okay, so that's the first thing to realize. The order matters. The other thing is you can see there's a lot of markings on these triangles over here. Basically, when angles are congruent, and we've seen this, they'll put an arc through them. Okay, so this arc, there's one arc through angle A, one arc through angle F. That's implying that they are congruent. They're the same measure. Okay, angle B and E have two arcs. Okay, that means that they're congruent to one another. C and D have three arcs. That means they're congruent to one another. Okay, so that's just kind of the way of distinguishing what is congruent to what. Okay, also same idea with the side lengths. We could see that side length AB is congruent to side length FE because it has one congruent bar through it. All right, and then we can see that AC is congruent to FD because it has two congruent bars, and same thing with BC and ED. All right, and basically the shorthand way of thinking about all of this is that the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, okay? And it's, here's a little acronym, CPCTC. All right, so corresponding parts, that just means the parts that land in the same spots on these triangles. Angle A and angle F would be considered corresponding angles. Okay, so would B and E, so would C and D. Same thing with these side lengths. This would correspond to this. So all the corresponding parts on these congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so we're going to use that to do some problems. All right, so go ahead, take a minute, copy this whole slide here, and we will answer it. Okay, so here's what it's asking. Determine whether the given triangles are congruent. Explain. Okay, we need to figure out if they're congruent. Okay, well, here's what we need to know for them to be congruent. All of their corresponding parts need to be congruent. All of the corresponding angles and all of the corresponding side lengths. All right, so let's start with the angles. That's normally where I'll start. It doesn't matter which one you look at, but I'm going to start with this one here. I can see that angle G is congruent to angle F. Okay, going around, I can see that angle J is congruent to angle M. Okay, and then I can see that angle H is congruent to angle L. By the way, they're both right angles. Okay, so yeah, first of all of the corresponding angles are congruent. Okay, next thing we're wondering, are all the corresponding sides congruent? Well, let's start with this one. We can see that side HG is congruent to side LK. They're both 7.1 meters. All right, and just kind of making my way around, yeah, we can see that this side length here, I'm going to make it green. JG is 2 meters. That means it's congruent to KM. And then we can see that JH is congruent to LM. Okay, so what we just realized is that, yes, all of the corresponding parts of these triangles are congruent. That means the triangles themselves are congruent to one another. Okay, so determine whether the triangles are congruent. Yes. Okay, and our explanation can just be this. It's because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so that's going to be our answer because, and I'm just going to use the shorthand, CPCTC. Okay, that's why these are congruent to one another. Another thing I'm wondering if I want to get into is let's write a congruency statement. They didn't ask, but let's write a congruency statement for these two triangles. And again, a congruency statement is this, saying that this triangle is congruent to the other triangle. All right, when you guys go to write a congruency statement, when you go to name your first triangle, it doesn't matter what you name that as long as you follow that same pattern on the other triangle. So I'm going to call this first one JHG. Okay, so triangle JHG. And I'm going to say it's congruent to the other triangle. Here's the thing, I have to follow the same pattern. Notice I usually look at the angles when I find my pattern. I went to 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 30 degrees. That's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to call this thing MLK. Okay, so that's a congruency statement. They didn't ask for it, but a lot of problems will, so I wanted you to be able to see it. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so here's a couple problems I just want you to take a look at and think about. This is determine whether the given triangles are congruent. I don't need you to copy these. I just want you to take a look, think about it, and see what you think. Take a look at this first one. Are these two triangles, are they congruent? Yes or no? Okay, well, first thing, I'm looking for first angles to be congruent. I can see that we have corresponding angles 70, 71. This one, 71, corresponds to this one. 38 corresponds to this one. So we have corresponding angles that are congruent. Do we have corresponding sides that are congruent? Yeah, this one is congruent to this one. This one's congruent to this one. And this one would be congruent to this one. Okay, so on this problem, yes, they would be congruent. Okay, and again, the reason they didn't ask for a reason, but it'd be because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, let's have you look at one more of them. Okay, so go ahead, check this one out. Tell me, what do you think? Yes or no? Okay, so taking a look at the angles again, I notice, all right, we got a pair of 60-degree angles. So we got one pair of corresponding angles congruent. Do we have all three pairs congruent? Okay, and this is where we kind of run into a little bump here. No, 79, 78, 41, 42, and that's enough. Okay, as long as one pair of corresponding angles are not congruent, no, we're done. These are not congruent triangles. Okay, and we can also see that we only have one pair of side lengths that are congruent. We would need all three pairs. Okay, all right, let's keep going. Okay, let's try another example. This one where they're actually asking us to find y, meaning they want us to make an equation out of some information. Go ahead and copy this all. Okay, so first thing, they're telling us that these triangles are congruent. That's important. All right, so here's what we are asked to do. Find y, and I notice that y is part of this side length right here, DE. Well, here's what I know. Since these two triangles are congruent, I know that their corresponding side lengths are also congruent. So I can set this side length equal to the corresponding side of this triangle. I first need to just figure out what is the corresponding side on this one. Okay, well, here's what I notice. DE is between the angle with one arc and three arcs. So I know the corresponding side on this one is going to do the same thing. Excuse me, it's going to be between the angles with one arc and three arcs. Okay, so that's why I know that those are the corresponding sides. You might have been tempted to think that this was its corresponding side, but notice it's between 2 and 3 arcs, all right, which, by the way, would correspond to this side line. Okay, so now that I know my corresponding sides, again, that means they're equal. So I can set these values equal. I could say 2y plus 20. By the way, I'm not going to use the parentheses. I'm not going to use the units. Is equal to 36. Okay, and pretty simple equation here. Now we can solve and get our answer. So subtracting 20 looks like, hold on here, sorry about that. We got 2y equals 16. Divide both sides by 2. Looks like y equals 8. Okay. And you guys could imagine if they asked us to plug it back in, we probably wouldn't even need to. If we plug 8 back into this, we know we're going to get 36, right? Because they're congruent. Okay, so the next thing I want you guys to get down is this thing called the triangle's sum theorem. Okay, copy this. This is an important one. Okay, so here's basically what it's saying. Angle A plus angle B plus angle C equals 180 degrees. There's that number again. Well, we see it all the time in this class. Okay, but this is something that is like a fundamental thing that will show up all the time in this class. It's the fact that the three angles of any triangle, when added together, always equal 180. Doesn't matter the shape of the triangle, the three angles will always add to 180. Memorize that, okay, because it's something that will show up a lot. Okay, so with that, let's try a couple problems. This is saying find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. Okay, so go ahead, copy this, and we'll figure this out. Okay, so find the value of the variable. Well, it's kind of skimming over this. I can see that a variable that we're looking for is x. Okay, so this is the focus, this angle. Okay, and here's what I know. If these are congruent triangles, I know that these corresponding angles would be congruent. And I know that the angle that corresponds to P would be L. Okay, which, by the way, the way I'm noticing that is I'm noticing it's in between this one with the 1 mark through it and the 3 marks, and this one as well, 1 and 3. So that's why I knew that those corresponded. Here's the problem. I don't know what L is. Okay, I'm going to set these equal, but I first need to figure out what L is. Okay, well, how do I do that? Here's where I have to remember what we just saw. I know that the three angles of a triangle must add to 180 degrees. All right, so if this is 55 and this is 45, what must this be? Well, the math is really simple. We just need to take 180, subtract both of these angles, 45, 55, and we'll get that missing angle. This is something you might, when you get easy numbers, you might be able to do this in your head. I know that 55 and 45 is 100. So if that's 100, what does this have to be for them to add to 180? 80, right? Okay, so there it is. That's the value. And now we can go ahead and make our equation and solve. So I know that 5x plus 30, this angle, is equal to this angle, 80. Okay, and again, pretty easy math. I'm going to do some of this in my head. Subtract 30 from both sides. I get 5x equals 50. Divide both sides by 5. X equals 10. Okay, and really the idea here is, to give it back into the context of the directions, find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. For these triangles to be congruent to one another, x must equal 10. Okay, if x doesn't equal 10, these would not be congruent triangles. That's kind of the idea of this problem. Okay, but again, it was just making equations. Okay, that's what a lot of this math is on this lesson. Okay, so finally, I'm gonna have you guys try one a lot like that. You're gonna go ahead and make your equation and solve for x here. I just wanna point out the corresponding side to this angle, the corresponding angle to this one, angle E, because it's between the 2 and 3 ticks, over here would be angle B. You first need to figure out what angle B is, and then you can make your equation, then you can set them equal. Okay, try it out. Okay, so here's what I would do first is to find angle B. I know I can take 180 and subtract both of these angles to find my missing one. So minus 112, minus 25. This is where, again, having a calculator is nice. Not necessary, but it's nice. So let's see. Looks like I'm getting 43. Okay, so that was the first big thing, is figuring out that this angle that corresponds to this angle that has our variable is 43. Now that we know that, we can make our equation. We can say x plus 17, this angle, equals this angle, 43. Okay, pretty easy math. Subtract 17 from both sides. So I'm going to do in my calculator. Looks like x is going to equal 26. Okay, so yeah, that's dealing with congruent triangles. This is a really big, important lesson. It's a fairly simple idea, but congruent triangles and congruent shapes is a really big part of geometry. And also, again, remember this triangle sum theory where the three angles add to 180, another fundamental, really important thing. Okay, so hopefully you guys are feeling good on this. I will see you in class. Bye.